Breaking news. Canon has officially really killed the DSLR. I swear in the clickbait gods this is true. I'm going to tell you all about it, specifically which DSLRs are dead first and which might get one more generation. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace makes websites incredibly simple to set up. A website is your presence on the internet. It cannot be social media. That disappears too quickly. They'll fill it up with ads. They'll make you pay to reach your audience. Ask me how I know. I learned the hard way. You need your own website so customers can reach you. Get a custom domain so they can email you. Set up your own private store that is yours. It's not as much as you might think. Check it out completely free at squarespace.com/Tony. When you love it, use the coupon code Tony and you'll get 10% off. Thanks, Squarespace. Before we get started, I want to point out I'm recording this on both our traditional studio camera, the Canon EOS RP in HD, and the Canon EOS R3 in 4K at 60 frames per second, so we can flip back and forth and you can get some idea. This is the first part of our video-focused R3 review, where we sort of put it through the paces and see how it responds in different situations. So check the sample footage and tell me what you think in the comments below. Before we get to the Canon news, a quick word about our Z9 review. We pre-ordered a Z9 within the first minutes of it going online. I was waiting there for it to appear to order it, and I assumed we would get them as soon as they launched on December 24th, but we did not. And there's no estimated shipping date, and some stores are saying it won't ship until October. If you're one of the lucky few who got a Z9, maybe you would loan it to us, or we could rent it from you. Send me an email here. Thanks.
By the way, the only Z9 I could find for sale anywhere is this one that's currently bidding over $10,000 with more than a day left. There's demand, but Nikon has no supply.
Here's a quote from Fujio Murarai, Canon's chairman and CEO, translated from a Japanese newspaper. Canon's SLR flagship model is known as the EOS 1 series, the first of which appeared in 1989. The last model, EOS 1DX Mark III, released in 2020, will be the last model, in fact. That's machine translated, so the English isn't perfect, but I reached out to native Japanese speakers and had several of them read the article and translate it for me. And they did confirm that what the CEO of Canon is saying is that there will never be another 1DX DSLR camera. That flagship series is dead. But he also said that they were completely ending the DSLR lineup, which they have never said before. The messaging has always been that we will continue to develop both lineups. This is kind of a big deal. He did say that there might be another generation of lower and mid-range DSLRs. That kind of surprises me in this era of chip shortage, where even a beast like Nikon can't ship out a $5,500 camera because they just can't get the parts or the manufacturing labor. So why would Canon decide to actually make a few more DSLRs? Well, they probably already have the factory set up to manufacture them pretty quickly, and it's not like they're going to put any revolutionary technology in them. These are going to be low-end cameras that you might see in Best Buy, where consumers would walk in and just grab something off the shelf, something that felt familiar, something like their father or grandfather used to use, and that really describes DSLRs pretty well. A couple of years ago, we suggested that Canon and Nikon would probably put out another round of DSLRs. That doesn't seem to be happening. We thought there was such a huge customer base of DSLR users that it made sense financially for their cash flow to continue to produce DSLRs for the existing customers to upgrade to without having to worry about using adapters or mirrorless lenses. That product planning made a lot of sense financially, I think, because it allowed Canon and Nikon to continue to generate cash while investing most of their R&D into their future mirrorless lens lineup. It didn't actually end up happening though, and I think the biggest reason is the chip shortage that we experienced in 2020. After all, it seems like all the manufacturers are limited in the amount of manufacturing by not just the number of chips that they can acquire, but the amount of labor that they can get to assemble these. And even after they're assembled, there are serious shipping limitations in actually getting these things to customers. So if you are limited in how much you can manufacture, wouldn't you put your attention into the newest, latest, greatest, most expensive stuff? Indeed, what we saw in 2021 was the release of extremely high-end mirrorless cameras and basically no DSLR cameras. Besides just the chip shortage, the labor shortage, the shipping problems, it makes sense that manufacturers have abandoned the DSLR, because when I talk to educated buyers now, they do not want to buy a DSLR even when it is by far their best choice. People are convinced that the DSLR is already dead, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. For example, talked recently with somebody who had a budget of $2,000 or $3,000 and they wanted to do wildlife photography. There's no great rig for wildlife photography in the mirrorless world at that price point when you count both the body and the lens. But I can put you in a great DSLR, something like a Nikon D7500, and the Nikon 200 to 500 lens will produce great results, far better than any similarly priced mirrorless camera in our actual real side-by-side testing. But people won't do it. Manufacturers have been marketing the benefits of mirrorless, whether or not they actually show up in your pictures, and that has convinced people that they need to go to mirrorless, even if it's not entirely logical, because that marketing is powerful. I still continually recommend people buy DSLRs for, well, everybody who's spending less than $1,000. You can get inexpensive mirrorless cameras, but in my opinion, in side-by-side testing, I prefer at that price point the less expensive DSLRs. They just produce better results, better autofocus systems, better usability, better battery life. Inexpensive mirrorless cameras can be kind of frustrating for the average person to use. I also recommend DSLRs for people shooting sports under $4,000. Yeah, if you have a higher budget for the body and lens, I could put you into a Canon EOS R6 and a 70-200, but now you're over $4,000 in total price. And above that, yeah, a Sony A1, Canon R3, which I'm filming on. Those are awesome for sports and mirrorless, but you're looking at $6,000 just for the body. For people at lower price points, I don't have a mirrorless camera that I can recommend that's going to outperform similarly priced DSLRs. The fact of the matter is, DSLRs are dead. And when we use the term dead to describe a technology, we don't mean that all the manufactured copies out there suddenly stop working. We don't mean that the pictures are necessarily better. Look, it's a metaphor. Technology was never alive to begin with. When we say dead technology, we mean a technology that's no longer receiving new innovation. This is obvious to most of you, but I have some people in my audience who get really enraged every time I use the word dead, as if they think their cameras are actually alive. The fact is, you do not need to switch to mirrorless. Even if you're shopping for a camera now, if you fit in one of those previous categories, you should probably buy a used DSLR or even a new DSLR. You can keep shooting, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yes, there are benefits to mirrorless. You don't have to feel bad about it if you already went to mirrorless, but it doesn't significantly change your image quality at all. The marketing around mirrorless has led a few people to switch for the size, because the first mirrorless cameras were significantly smaller than the DSLRs at the time. But now that we look at the best mirrorless cameras, things like the Sony A7 IV, the A1, the Canon R3, they're not small cameras. And when you put the lens on there, the lenses are the same size as the DSLRs, except for like the ultra-wide lenses. The telephoto lenses, the mid-range lenses, exactly the same size. Thus, the size and the weight of mirrorless cameras really are not a significant benefit of the platform. The image quality is exactly the same. There have not been any significant image quality improvements in the last 5 or 6 years. Things leveled off. The technology has stopped advancing. Your D50 produces essentially identical, maybe even slightly better images than a brand new Nikon Z7 Mark II. You're not going to lose a whole bunch of resale value if you buy a DSLR right now, because everything's going to lose some amount of resale value, and the fact that they're not making DSLR gear anymore actually drives up the demand, because DSLR buyers will now have to buy from the used market. There are legitimate reasons to switch from DSLR to mirrorless. For example, the silent shooting when you're using the viewfinder. If you're a golf photographer, it's a requirement. If you're a wedding photographer and you're used to shooting with a DSLR clink, clink, clink in the middle of the ceremony, it's very distracting. Shooting silently is such a benefit. Also, if you ever want to use the viewfinder for shooting video, you can't do that with the DSLR. It's blanked out, but with a mirrorless camera you can, and that allows you to see and review your footage in bright sun where the rear screen gets washed out. Mirrorless cameras can also use eye detect, sophisticated subject tracking autofocus that doesn't currently exist in any DSLR model. It could, it's just that it doesn't. Mirrorless cameras are also receiving all the newest lenses, and those newest lenses are better than the older DSLRs. It's not a fundamental limitation of the DSLR, it's just a compatibility limitation. If you want compatibility, you gotta go mirrorless for better or worse. Canon and Nikon decided to switch to mirrorless just a couple of years ago, and it was not a small decision. By removing the mirror, and reducing the flange distance, they needed to create an entirely new lineup of lenses or force people to use adapters to use their old lenses. DSLRs also have separate sensors for autofocus and metering, so the camera manufacturers had to move those technologies onto the image capture sensor. That's why those first mirrorless cameras didn't have great autofocus. Why would they decide to do that? Well, camera manufacturers were actually losing a massive amount of market share. Look at this chart. You can see from like 2007 to 2011, cameras were selling like crazy, and they have since plummeted. Those sales have been replaced with smartphone cameras. So how did the industry respond? Well, they took about 7-8 years and then reduced the flange distance of the camera and switched the viewfinder from optical to electronic. In hindsight, it seems ridiculous that this is how they responded to smartphones stealing their entire industry. After all, this whole time we've been begging for them to put some useful consumer technology into their DSLRs. Here's some of the things that we've been asking for that they have simply refused to address. How about we start with decent smartphone apps? The connection between your camera and the smartphone, where you're probably going to edit and share your images right now, it's terrible. No manufacturer has more than 2.5 stars for their camera app. They all suck. I would also love to see on-camera apps make the operating system an open platform so that people can develop, say, a custom time-lapse algorithm, some programmability. Cameras still don't have wireless microphones or headphones or flashes. All of those require a physical connection in a world where everything is wireless. Speaking of wireless, I still transfer pictures from a tiny floppy disk called a CF Express card or an SD card. I still don't have a good way to transfer files over the wireless connection. Yes, they technically have Wi-Fi, but try it. It absolutely sucks. It is painfully slow. For some reason, they can't figure out how to make a decent wireless connection. While we're at it, why not get rid of the SD card completely? Give me internal memory, at least as a backup. Even basic things like searchable menus. You cannot search the menu of any modern camera. There's also no intelligence given to computational photography. Do you know what the new Google Pixel phones do with astrophotography? They have literal astro trackers built in that can take a 4-minute exposure with no star trails. Compare my smartphone pictures to my EOS R3 pictures of stars. It is stunning. Can you imagine what the EOS R3 would do if it had similar computational photography? But it doesn't, and it's probably not going to, because Canon has been busy switching to mirrorless, which like nobody really asked for. There's also no image privacy. If somebody steals your camera, they have access to all of your pictures. What if you were shooting the Gucci Spring lineup and all of that leaked out? If you did it with your smartphone, all that would be private and protected because it has security features. In fact, everything would be backed up into the cloud so you wouldn't even lose your images. You would just have to buy a new device and not worry about it. But with a camera, none of it's backed up to the cloud and all of the images are lost. There's also no anti-theft built into any camera, despite the fact that photographers are frequently the subject of theft, even losing their lives over their cameras. Finally, none of the major manufacturers have developed a camera with Android OS, and this would actually be the key part of this, because developing an intelligent OS with decent APIs that you could use to leverage to, say, copy files to Google Drive with just a few lines of code would make all their software development so much easier. But every single major manufacturer just keeps developing their clunky operating system. Okay, I kind of transitioned this from talking about Canon's announcement to being frustrated over why all the camera manufacturers decided to put all their engineering R&D into something that nobody really asked for. Look, give me the choice between a DSLR with all of these features or a mirrorless camera with a reduced flange distance, and yeah, I would pick the more usable DSLR every time. And in fact, I would recommend it to people, and more people would use this in 2021 and 2022 because this imaginary camera would much better fit the modern photographer's lifestyle. The fact of the matter is, most people who would buy a camera are happy with their smartphone for general photography. There are a couple of niches that still require people to use a traditional camera to get good results, and those are sports and wildlife. But if you remember earlier, those are two segments where I still recommend people shoot DSLRs. So this whole focus on mirrorless seems a little bit silly, but nonetheless, that is the direction camera manufacturers are going. We can definitively say the DSLR is dead. Thank you to our sponsor, Squarespace, which will create a beautiful website for you. You don't have to be a designer. You don't have to be a nerd. You just have to be able to drag and drop. That's enough to make a beautiful website for your photography portfolio, your personal project, or any type of business. I run several different Squarespace websites, each with their own unique domain. One is not enough. Head to squarespace.com/Tony right now. Get a free trial. See how easy it is. Show it to your friends. They're going to be impressed. And when you're ready, use the coupon code Tony to get 10% off. Thank you, Squarespace. In the comments down below, I'd like to hear your feelings about Canon killing off the DSLR. Are you still happy with your DSLR? Do you wish there would be more development in the DSLR fields? And are you happy that the biggest manufacturers put so much of their engineering effort into the switch from DSLR to mirrorless instead of maybe some of these other areas that might have more of an impact on the actual photographer's experience? Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks and bye.